Hey, Trey here, and you're listening to Us and Them, the podcast where we tell stories of America's culture divides. When was the last time something really transformed you? I mean, like you're moving through life with a certain perception or a way of viewing the world, and then you see or hear something, and it stops you dead in your tracks. And you change your mind. You know, kind of like the story from the Bible of Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. Or maybe it's a little different than that. Say that you do something or say something that goes wrong, maybe really wrong. And then you feel compelled to confront yourself and take a deep, penetrating look at your actions. Now, this kind of clarifying, transformative moment may not happen very often, but I wanted to tell you about it because I've discovered a podcast. It's called Reckonings, and it's hosted and produced by Stephanie Lepp. And it focuses on stories of these pivotal transformations. Hi, Stephanie. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you, Trey?
I'm good. Can you tell me a little bit about the Reckonings podcast and how you got that started?
Yeah. So really it was just, throughout college and early into my professional life, being involved in social issues and social change, the question would always come up for me, am I changing anyone's mind? Am I actually moving anyone on climate change or minimum wage laws or whatever issue I happen to be focused on at the time, which of course then begs the question, how do people actually change their hearts and minds? And that question just became kind of a loose fascination of mine, and I started kind of trying to research around. I'm looking to learn about how people change in really fundamental ways, and this loose exploration I finally realized might be really powerful to manifest in the form of stories of people who have made these kinds of transformative change.
And so I heard one of these stories of transformative change on a Reckonings episode that came out back in 2018. And it kind of blew me away. The story focuses on two college students, Anwen and Sameer. Now, those are not their real names. And just as a note, their story contains descriptions of sexual activity that may not be suitable for all listeners. So, Anwen and Sameer meet at a fraternity party during their freshman year. They dance a little and kiss a little, and when it's time to leave, they go to the room of one of the fraternity brothers where they've left their coats and keys. But the door is locked, and there's no one to let them in. So they end up heading back to Sameer's dorm room. And what happens next changes their lives.
I had no condoms anymore because my jacket was also in that brother's room. So I was like, well, we're not going to have sex, but I still would like to take her back home with me.
I didn't want to spend the night in his room because I didn't want to have sex with him. And I didn't want to keep making out with him, but I didn't know where else to go.
I did not remember emotionally manipulating her to coming back to staying with me.
He kept kissing me. I was underneath him, and I was just panicking. We maneuvered around. I was sitting up, and he said, "Take it off." And I said, "What?" He says, your shirt."
I thought in my brain I had asked her to take her shirt off.
And as soon as he put his hand on my breast, it was just absolute revulsion in my body. And I said no, and I pulled my shirt back down. And I curled up on his bed. And he moved me and had his hand on the back of my head, and started pushing my head down on him.
I thought from my perspective, I was being a potential like teacher when it came to like oral sex.
I can remember feeling like I was gagging, like I was choking. I think I started crying. Um, this was both something I'd never experienced before and didn't want to be experiencing.
Like from my end, I was like, oh, like this was just a fun hookup. But then from her end, this guy is like pushing himself on me, and um, it didn't sound like me. It sounded like a monster. But that was the hardest part, was that like this guy who forced himself onto this girl is me.
So, after this encounter, Anwen and Sameer see each other a few more times, but basically go their separate ways. So, Stephanie, I want to pick up with their story after a good bit of time goes by. And at this time, Sameer decides that he wants to be a college orientation guide. Is that right?
Yes.
And to do that, he has to take Green Dot training. What's that?
Yeah, Green Dot Bystander Intervention is a program on college campuses all over the country that teaches students how to respond to sexual assault on campus. And the idea, Green Dot Bystander, the idea is, if you're a bystander, how do you recognize when something is sexual assault? What does that look like? What is sexual assault, so you can actually recognize it, and then what do you do in that context? How do you respond?
And it was at this training session that made Sameer think back on his experience with Anwen.
The prompter said that it's assault when someone uses emotional manipulation to coerce somebody to like do sexual acts. Like, sexual assault isn't just based on like using physical violence. It's also just putting somebody in a situation where they feel like they can't say no. That night, like that night was the first thing that popped into my head. Wait, did I do this? Is this who I am? Like, did this happen? Like, if it did happen, why? Like, is that how Anwen feels about this? It's like, well, no, like, you haven't been like, she would have reported something, but she hasn't. Maybe she doesn't see it that way. Maybe she just also views it like I did, where it was like a bad hookup and like a really awkward hookup. I was terrified that I assaulted her. I was terrified that I had hurt her in this way. I was terrified of myself, because if this was true and I did assault her, then what did that make me? I was terrified of being found out. I was terrified of being sent to jail. I was terrified of all the consequences that come with sexual assault and rape.
And around this time, Anwen decides that she also wants to be a college orientation guide, and she has to take the Green Dot training as well. And what was her takeaway from the training?
She had a similar experience. I mean, she had been kind of processing that night off and on, but she had a similarly narrow understanding of sexual assault or rape. She thought that rape required, or sexual assault required, vaginal penetration. But the point is, she was really feeling this, and the weight of it, was intrusive thoughts, nightmares, trouble sleeping, trouble in class. So it really was affecting her, and it was from this training that she too had the experience of, oh, okay, that now I understand why I'm feeling this so heavily. What happened that night was sexual assault.
So now they both have a different perspective on what happened. Did they meet each other again? Did they connect again to talk?
Yeah. So since they were both orientation leaders, they eventually ended up at the same orientation training. And she saw him and called out his name and asked him to talk. And they sat down and she just said, I want to talk about that night. And he said, okay, that night that I you came home with me? And she said yes, and she just said, name it. She said, name what happened that night. And he said, I raped you.
It was a powerful feeling to feel that I was not just crazy and that he also knew that it had been wrong.
Yes, I knew it in my head. Yes, I knew it to myself, but admitting it to the person I did it, it's just, yeah, I mean, I hated myself. I wanted to kill myself. I asked her, like, hey, like, do you want me to kill myself? Do you want me to, like, turn myself into the police? Like, what do you want? What can I do? What I know I can't fix this, but what can I do? I know I can't fix this, but what can I do? And that's when she offered to ask if we could talk more. And I said, okay.
Now, this is the part that really got to me. It's one of those transformative moments that I've been telling you about. I mean, both of them went to the Green Dot training and afterwards started to rethink things. And not just rethink them. Anwen had the courage to call out to Sameer and ask to have a conversation. And Sameer didn't shy away from talking. And not only that, he was willing to own up that he realized that he had violated Anwen. Now, after I first heard the story of Anwen and Sameer, I shared this Reckonings episode with several people, and all of them were intrigued with the story. They expressed a lot of care and concern for Anwen and Sameer, but almost all of them, male and female, had a problem with Sameer concluding that he'd raped Anwen. Maybe it's because the people I shared this with are older and grew up at a time when sexual assault had a looser and perhaps more ambiguous definition. I mentioned this confusion over definitions and language to Stephanie.
I did ask Anwen and Sameer about language, and they gave me kind of a brilliant answer. They said that they use the language that helps them achieve their goal. And for Sameer, what he's trying to do is really stay tethered to this thing he did so that he can learn from it and grow from it. And the word rape actually helps him do that. So he uses that word. And Anwen is okay with him using that word. She does not use that word because for her goal, she's recovering. And so she'd rather not use the word rape, and she uses the word sexual assault.
So Anwen and Sameer found a way to strategically use language so that it could help them learn, grow, and heal. Coming up, we'll hear how these two college students chose to right the wrong that occurred that night.
Every time that I've wanted to punish myself beyond all belief, she always said, no, I want you to do better.
I didn't want to take away his agency because that would just be reversing the roles.
I'm Trey K, and this is Us and Them, which is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
I'm Trey K, and you're listening to Us and Them. I'm speaking with Stephanie Lepp, host and producer of the Reckonings podcast. And we're talking about an episode that she produced about two college students, the victim and perpetrator of a sexual assault, and how they chose to deal with their experience. Anwen and Sameer talked several times to clarify what happened between them, but things became uncomfortable, so they dropped out of touch for a while. The next time they met was at a public event on campus. It was a Take Back the Night rally. There was a march to protest sexual violence. Anwen was there, and so was Sameer.
At the end of the march, everyone ended up in an auditorium, and someone invited people, I think including kind of extended an invitation to survivors to come up and speak and share their story.
It was, unrehearsed. I walked up to the mic and started speaking pretty much. And I kind of went through the story a little bit and more just like the emotions afterwards, but I didn't say his name, and he was sitting in the audience right in front of me.
And he was sitting in the audience, and she could see him. He was sitting pretty close.
I was actually sitting about 10 feet away from her. I tried really hard to keep myself together. I couldn't look her in the eye. But I felt like such a hypocrite. This is supposed to be a space that's meant for survivors and allies. If you throw even a well-meaning perpetrator in there, does that negatively impact the movement itself?
She wanted Sameer to be up there with her and telling the story with her.
I wanted him to be able to be standing up there with me and speaking the story with me, and be able to have the story be exposed in a way that didn't just write us into the categories of like angelic, pure survivor, horrible, evil assaulter.
And she even said, if this person comes forward and tells his story, I hope that you'll listen to him.
So this was a Take Back the Night event. Why was Sameer there?
Sameer was there as a support person for his new girlfriend, who was also a survivor. And his girlfriend actually knew. He had told her what had happened with Anwen, so his girlfriend knew. And so here he is, like a perpetrator of, sexual violence, a support person for his girlfriend who is a survivor of sexual violence, and he's, looking at Anwen up there telling her story, and he's just feeling so many emotions.
So after this meeting, Anwen wants to do something else, and she wants to figure out another way to process this, and so she goes to speak to somebody from the university. He
yes.
was the director of student conduct?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so he's the guy you go to when, someone is acting out or, cheating on tests or, giving alcohol to minors or whatever it is. And he figures out how to kind of route that complaint.
So what did they talk about?
Yeah, so she, amazingly for her, he had just been kind of starting to do, I think just based on his own personal interest, training on restorative justice. And so he just asked her open-endedly, what she wanted. And she knew she didn't want, a verdict handed down from on high. She knew she wanted Sameer to be actively involved in the process.
Right.
What was important to her was that both of them were empowered to make things better. And in talking to the director of student conduct and telling him what she wanted, he just said to her, it sounds like what you're talking about is restorative justice.
What is restorative justice?
Restorative justice focuses on the harm. that was caused? How was the victim impacted? What are their needs? What can be done to repair the harm? And that's the goal, repairing harm.
So how did the restorative justice process work for Anwen and Sameer?
So there's this common refrain that restorative justice is too lenient, and Sameer, Sameer, it said it's absolutely the hardest thing he's ever done in his life. To truly face himself and his impact on another person without just drowning himself in self-pity, because that could happen too. You can just say, I'm such a monster, I should therefore kill myself, or I should get sent to jail, or I should, and that's paralyzing. That's not actually helpful to the victim or the survivors.
Well, one of the things that really moved me was that the facilitator or the counselor asked Sameer to write out his account of what happened that night. And he wrote it out in probably the best detail that he could. And then after that, he also had Anwen write out her account of what happened and had let Sameer read that. And it seemed like he really had almost like a conversion.
A reckoning.
A reckoning. Once Sameer read Anwen's account of what happened, he understood the harm he'd caused. The way Anwen and Sameer used restorative justice involved several phases and required Sameer to do a number of things. He would find ways to tell the story, and he would talk with young men about consent, how to seek clear, open communication with potential sexual partners. He would write an article for the campus newspaper using his real name. They both wanted Green Dot training to be mandatory and free for all students in fraternities and sororities. Sameer even offered to talk with younger students in high school, but so far he hasn't had a school take him up on the offer. One thing they did together was a spoken word piece about their experience, performed on campus. There was plenty of awkward silence in the audience, but afterwards, many students came up to thank them. I guess I'm wondering, I could see a scenario where Anwen, who, even as we know the story right now, she was very confused as she was going through this process. What if she would have talked to Sameer, talked to the counselor at the school, gone through the restorative justice process, but then at some point realized, you know what, this guy should have paid for his conduct.
She could have absolutely done that, and Sameer knew that. Sending Sameer to jail was not going to help her repair the harm. And, however, at any point, certainly during the restorative justice process, she could have pressed charges. And it should be said that restorative justice and traditional criminal justice are not mutually exclusive. But she was oriented towards what was going to help her. And so that's what has been guiding her. And what was going to help her and what was going to prevent this from happening again. And she thought she would achieve that goal better by having Sameer do kind of exactly what he's doing, tell his story.
Every time that I've wanted to punish myself beyond all belief, she always said, no, I want you to do better. Don't just take the easy route and lock yourself up or get yourself kicked off campus, because that's not going to help anybody. Because she never wanted to punish me. She wanted me to learn. She wanted me to grow. She wanted me to prevent this from ever happening.
I didn't want to take away his agency, because that would just be reversing the roles. I would say what's important to me in the restorative justice process is that both people are given a space where they are empowered to make things better. I want all of this to be shared, and I want to speak out about it, and I want to tell this story, and I want to be telling this story with Sameer because it's so powerful to have both of us speaking.
So what's the current relationship between Anwen and Sameer?
Yeah, they have this really interesting situation where they both know each other better than most other people in their lives because they know this really deep thing about each other that not even all of their friends don't necessarily know. And so they check in every once in a while. They're friendly. They've been in touch a little more recently since the episode because of the episode and other interest in the episode. But yeah, they said that they'll probably end up knowing each other for the rest of their lives.
Now, I think it's worth noting that what happened between Anwen and Sameer was before the Me Too movement. And while the whole Me Too thing has been a watershed moment to call out men's inappropriate conduct, you don't really hear a lot of stories of people working to heal the damage, with men dropping their defenses and owning up to their own conduct, and women being open to let that happen.
Pre-Me Too, it was kind of, it was more black and white, I guess. And it was, there's the bad guys and, lock them up. And, but now we're getting into much grayer territory, which is complicated and, involves real emotional self-awareness. And so, yeah, we've seen the enemy and it is us. It's our brothers, it's our sons, it's our dads, it's our uncles, it's our, political figures, it's our comedians. So, we kind of all have to grow through this.
Well, Stephanie, I have to say you really put together an episode that took me to places that I was not expecting, and I feel like you have brought a new twist to the conversation, and I think that you've seized on something that many of us have felt missing from the Me Too conversation. Thanks so much for sharing this really great story with me.
Thank you, Trey. I really appreciate that.
You've been listening to Us and Them. If you'd like to hear the full Reckonings episode, it's called A Survivor and Perpetrator Find Justice, and it can be downloaded any place you get your podcasts. Our team for this show is me, Trey K, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to our friend and old colleague, Mitch Hanley, for letting us know about this remarkable story. Michael Lipton and Tristan Lozow wrote and performed the S&M show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The wonderful people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the West Virginia Humanities Council, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
From PRX.